yeah, I thought it would be really fun. Let's see, it's preparing it. This is actually one of the few times I hardly ever go live in YouTube, but I thought it would be kind of fun. So here we go.
Okay.
All right, so there we go. So I've muted the player now in YouTube, so I won't hear myself in two places. So, hi, Mark. Thanks for coming. So I don't know if you want me to introduce you, or if you want to introduce yourself, but it's always fun to get to have the opportunity to speak to you about important topics in the industry and our trends. And this is a really good one. Virtual medical care 5.0 with ChatGPT getting 94 on the medical boards.
Yeah. I'm a family doc who fell in love with technology in the 90s and probably was too far ahead of myself for much of my career. And I'd like to think about how technology can democratize and literally make healthcare more affordable for the masses. And I think it's only technology that can do that. Healthcare is a very labor-intensive proposition, and as such, as we know, very error-prone. And automation, where automation can help, has been positive. So when I start to think about things like chat or generative AI in a more general term, I think about the classic theories about disruption from below. Worked for a long time at Intel, and one of the heroes at Intel for strategy development was Clay Christensen. And so Clay Christensen talked about disruptive innovation and the classic patterns it kind of develops. So when you think about chat, I'm not thinking it's going to take the place of a doctor anytime soon. That isn't even close to what I'm thinking. You start to think about disruption from below. You start to think about what are the functions in healthcare that occur right now, let's say that are free, that healthcare gives away, there's no charge for. That'd be a nice one to disrupt, because there'd be no economic goose to poke and nobody to really complain, because you're doing something for free and you're doing it better. And that's how disruption would start. So when I start to think about free things that are given away by healthcare, one of the first things that occurs to me is helplines of all sorts. The NHS was big on that. That had chat lines in Scotland and Wales and in England. Many private healthcare companies in the United States, from United to Aetna to Cigna, all have chat functions or help functions. And if you start to think these would be available 24/7, they could help do triage and help answer somebody's questions, and could inform them in a manner that's best for their teaching.
And we already have some apps that do that, right? There's like what was that called? iTriage, I think, that you and I talked about a few years ago, and some of these other things that are already coming down the pike to do that. Yeah.
The difference here with generative AI is it's going to learn from you, from your interactions with it, and it's going to get better at explaining things to you in a manner in which you understand, as opposed to, here's the manner we think you'll understand, we've programmed it, and if you don't get it, sorry.
Okay, so let's talk about that in a second, Mark. Let's talk about that for the people watching us who aren't necessarily informaticists like you and me. So let's talk a little bit about what is generative AI. How does that work? So I call. Go ahead.
The generative AI, in the simplest terms, is artificial intelligence that gets smarter the more you use it. It becomes generative. That might be the easiest way to describe it without being technical. So if you play chess against it, it gets smarter against what your strategy is, and it plays better chess against you.
Nice. Okay.
So here, one of the first places that we think generative AI is going to disrupt is education. There's a public company, Chegg, that has suffered some recent setbacks, including some comments in its recent quarterly report that generative AI is probably going to affect its online educational business. So these free help functions, they become natural places for companies, large companies, to start testing it out. I'm sure Ingenix is already going down this path, and it might even offer the service to other private companies, whoever starts to perfect this the best. And it's very large customers, like I said, the NHS. And when you offer free healthcare to all your citizens, you have a vested interest in providing them good input so that they don't go to the emergency room. If you have to make them wait a half hour, they'll probably go to the emergency room. But if it's instantaneous, immediate at 2 a.m. wherever you are, you got a better shot at it. If it's in Hungarian and Czechoslovakian, whatever native language, it's also kind of hard to do that currently with the technology available. But this will respond to your accent and figure it out, and it'll talk to you in whatever language you want. So that might be one of the first places. Poison control centers. I could certainly see as a initial response. It's very formulaic. I could kind of see an artificial assistant inside of an ambulance, taking in the vital signs that the ambulance has. That might kind of be a step up and starting to make recommendations to the EMTs about which way they might want to go. Again, without having to have connectivity to something beyond. The models in which you want to disrupt would certainly, in theory, be, start with something free, starting with something low value, start with disrupting something that when you do disrupt it, people around you go, oh, thank God you did that. You took away a cost center from me, not a profit center. And that's how you get started. And as it gets better and better, you move up the food chain of complexity of what the AI can do. It might be able to assist doctors with diagnosis, but I don't suspect it's going to make diagnosis. It still has too many hallucinations to me want to trust it to doing something like that.
So that was the part that I thought was very interesting that you brought up on my LinkedIn post about how the chat GPT got a 94% on the medical board, which made me think about how we educate doctors.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Is there a better way, whether we're talking about, so, my doctorate is in health science, even though I went to AT Still University, which, from your medical background is an osteopath institution, where actually osteopathy started. But I'm thinking about in terms of like how the students maybe study for the boards or some other kind of way that technology could be used for it just improving medical practice.
Well, totally. That's what I said. I think the first place in organizations that acknowledge it is education. I'm trying to think about the healthcare specific things within the healthcare vertical. I would kind of put that in the bucket of education. It's going to change everything, how you train accountants,
Pharmacy.
lawyers,
How you use the pharmacy. Yeah,
anyone. The other kind of more specific things to healthcare, it'll probably help with insurance claims transactions, answering questions, directing more autofill for forms. People can describe what's going on and the forms get generated. But again, things that are very formulaic that that's why it scored well on the boards. The boards are, multiple choice or one right answer type of question. They're not generally where judgment starts to come in. I think, again, it has to learn, it has to grow. But when you're asking it about an objective reality that has a, I don't know, 1 in 10,000 occurrence, the average guy might not remember that, but it's going to be the same as a 1 in 100 occurrence to chat.
Right.
It won't matter. So you start with those kind of more formulaic approaches, because that's where the disruption is. It's the low-hanging, more obvious fruit. And we could start to think about a lot of them. We mentioned a couple with, triage. What about, again, the fact that it's sympathetic, maybe a suicide hotline, which, again, you can't get enough volunteers, you can't get enough people have to wait, it becomes less relevant if you're waiting. But now all of a sudden you're talking to someone in your language who's very empathetic and sympathetic, and it starts to learn the more you talk to it. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's somebody that's hearing you and responding to you, and let me get you to a human being type of thing. But it's available 24/7, 365, and 800 languages. those are the kind of ways I would start to think. And then you'd start to think, now that I got that as a base and I got that as a learning, I got the language models. And also with the language models, you're going to see, right, right now there's only one kind of real chip that can run the language models efficiently, but nothing stays the same. Welcome to the rate of change. I mean, somebody's going to develop a way to for lack of a better term, to compress the language models and let them run more efficiently with less cost. That's just a natural evolution of where we're headed with this. And then maybe the upper level functions that get better at judgment and faster at learning, they'll still need the more, but you'll have something that's good enough running a slightly less costly compute model.
Yeah, I think they'll always need a human at some point. I mean, it can learn judgment, it can do these things, but I still think there are certain things that we'll still need to have humans do. But I do think you're correct. It's going to move along, and it's really interesting. And I know you spent most of your career looking at, trends and how can we use this technology in more efficient ways. And healthcare, as you know, seems to always lag on this. I get this question a lot about, healthcare lagging, but I'm excited to see how we embrace this AI stuff in healthcare.
Yeah, there will be models. There will be complaints. I think it's got the potential to disrupt a lot of white collar jobs, as opposed to robotics and maybe blue collar type of stuff. But this is going to be, at the end of the day, it will cause disruption. But I suspect it will also cause more jobs than it eliminates in a way that we can't foresee, because those are the second order effects. But every piece of technology that's ever happened has actually created more opportunity, as opposed, steam engines didn't put people, I don't know, who textiles and all the automation on the factory and the industrializations put a lot of people out of business. We were agrarian and now we're not, and now I can't imagine. I'm not. I don't think I'm smart enough to see the second order effect of what chat. I might see the things it's going to disrupt and the people it might put out of business, but the things it's going to create are going to be even more transformative and more imaginary and beneficial to society. Again, the goal, if you had a long-term goal, is to egalitize healthcare and make it affordable for the masses. If you can make it affordable, you can get governments out of it. You make it affordable. People can get decent healthcare, and it's not going to have the same form, quality, tone that I don't know, getting on a horse versus getting in a jet plane does. The horse, you got a personal relationship. The jet plane is a jet plane.
Right.
There's a difference to it. I'm not saying it's good, bad. It's just qualitatively different. And the jet plane gets people farther, faster, more cheaper than the horse ever did. It's just a natural evolution. And I think, that as we're describing many orders of magnitude between horse travel and jet travel, I think we're the same thing we're describing in the ability of, again, automated systems to deliver baseline routine help to the healthcare system to help it grow and evolve into a more affordable, accessible system than it is currently. There's a lot of imbalance.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things like disruption. We as human beings tend to think of disruption as a negative connotation and a negative term, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think for healthcare, there's a lot of really great things. I remember the story you told me about when you were on call, and you were like, well, I haven't killed anybody, and I treated more people than I would have in the office, and it cost a lot less for this time, and I remember thinking how interesting that was, and how interesting it was to me that it took us this long to get to the fact that we do have these virtual visits and stuff like that, which I think the pandemic really enhanced some of these things, speaking of disruption. But it was very interesting to me that, physicians have always been on call since the beginning of medicine, but it took this long for us to get to a point where It's like, oh, you want to have a virtual visit? Okay, we'll have a virtual visit. And it's a very normal routine thing now, as opposed to, when I was growing up, right, where that would never have even been heard of, but you could call the office after hours and get your advice. And that's something too that you could disrupt, right? You could disrupt this idea of physicians being on call. You still need a human for some of these things, but you can also have some of those things are very performulary, right?
Yeah. Again, I probably wouldn't start with those high level
Right, but you could get there. Yeah.
That might be your end goal. That's why I started with something really simple, like something that's free, that's giveaway, suicide prevention, poison control, nurse triage, things that are straightforward, maybe EMS, where the time benefit and the optimization is worth the trade-off. You're not going to disrupt at the top of the food chain with any technology, no matter how good it is. That's not how it's going to start. It's going to start from the bottom and work its way in and get better and better. And that's the whole purpose of generative AI. It's going to get better and better in leaps and bounds, faster and faster. The rate of change is accelerating. And the future is hard to predict, mainly because it's the future. Yeah.
Well, right. And that's why we do these things, right, with the predictive modeling and these other types of things that we do to try to get a sense. And that's, I think, what's so exciting about the AI world is that, people are looking at this, right, and some people are probably trying to predict. I don't like to get out a crystal ball, which is why I'm like, hey, it might be fun to, have this as an end goal type of thing. But I still think whatever we do with AI, whether it's healthcare related or not, it's still at some point going to need a human, because like you could do coding, medical coding with AI for a while, but you would still need a human to review those codes to make sure they were correct, because there's always an opportunity for some kind of error. So I think wherever there's these things that are a little more complicated, like what you were talking about, you're still going to need a human, no matter how good the technology gets, because somebody's still going to have to review that and say, yes, this is the correct way to go.
Again, I think you find the use cases that works for this. It was the same way when I talked about, remote care and telemedicine 30 years ago, 20 years ago. I wasn't trying to talk about how to do C-sections by telemedicine. I was trying to talk about how I might help somebody with a rash. So
right.
You start with the more obvious things that are going to work, not the things that intuitively are going to be more complex, and you'll likely fail if you try to do that. So that's why I start to think about all the imaginative things in healthcare I could do. You talk about coding. You might turn a generative AI model loose on an IDN that's doing coding, and all of a sudden you see its compliance with its regulator jump 50% and its revenue jump 20%. I don't know if I want to throw a human in there to investigate why that happened. That's a good result. That's a good outcome. Let's keep going. On the other hand, if you saw the exact opposite happen, yes, you'd say, no, this isn't a good experiment. Let's go do something else. So you can put milestones and checkpoints and rails into anything that you do, whatever model you choose to develop. I mean, if you choose to do nurse triage, you'd like to make sure that when you're evaluating doing triage, you haven't killed a whole bunch of people by telling them to stay home and take aspirin.
Right.
So there would be checks and balances on anything you do, and naysayers saying, no matter what you do that's different, it's no good, and others saying, I don't know, it's 10x more available and 1/10 the price. To use orders of magnitude.
And I like your example about the C-section, because that's something that I personally think is always going to need a human, because if you were even to try to talk to that, if you were even going to try to talk about how to do that via telemedicine, you'd still need a human on the other end of the telemedicine who knows how to perform one, because that's something that would be a very, very specific, highly complicated process and task and everything. So I could see applications of that, though, for like some of the more rural areas where Maybe they have people who know how to do those sorts of things, but I still think that would be a long way out, and that would probably be more of an education application than a healthcare one, to my mind, only because, once again, performing surgery on people, like, I certainly wouldn't want to try to do that.
Well, again, that's why you wouldn't start with that as the use case or the model, or even talk about it.
Right.
I mean, you might use it in, again, education and training of surgeons, but not to do, again,
Correct.
that's education and training. It's not healthcare delivery. And I'm trying to stick to any kind of delivery use case or delivery model I can think of. And again, it doesn't have to just be US based. It could be, rural based, where, again, one of the nice parts about remote care, telemedicine, however you want to word it, if the technology gets cheap and available and easy enough to use, smartphones have done a lot of things with a lot of benefits and blah, blah, blah. So again, the whole purpose of talking about chat in healthcare is just to start to inspire smart people who are doing something to say, is there any part of what I'm doing where I could use generative AI to make it more efficient? I'm not trying to do everything that way, but is there any part of it? And so you throw out a few use cases, a few ideas, they kind of wet their whistle, and then they go, aha. And that's what you hope happens. You inspire them.
I think it's great to inspire them. I think that is the way to go forward. I have a friend actually who's in pharmacy school right now who said, oh, AI is going to kill pharmacist jobs. And I said, no, we'll still need a pharmacist. There might be things in the pharmacy, just like we're talking about in healthcare. There might be some things in the pharmacy that AI could do, but I think you're still going to need a human at the end of the day.
You might need less, and the humans you do need might be doing other things. Generative AI may make it such that I can do clinical trials as an educated pharmacologist, whereas before you had to get hired by an expensive, multinational drug company. But now with generative AI, smaller entities would have access to things we couldn't dream, in how you might set up a virtual clinical trial to prove some aspect of whatever. A new use case for a drug that previously one thought of as a side effect, and now it's a use case. Again, the idea here is to be inspirational, to get people who are experts in these sub areas to start to think and loosen the wheels, so that they're energetic and want to go forward with change, as opposed to reluctant and change is going to wipe out my job. It's not going to wipe out your job. It's going to change everything, but it's not going to wipe out your job. You're still going to,
or where they feel stuck and they feel like they can't bring the change, that they could maybe watch us, or I don't know, something else. But I like to think they watch us, because I like to think that we're that important. So, they watch us and they get inspired to get unstuck, right? And they're thinking about it, because I do think you're right. I don't think it's going to wipe out many of the jobs that people think are going to be wiped out. It may wipe out some things, but I don't think it's going to go to the point we were making earlier, right? We're not going to have AI surgeons going on. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for this technology to come in and help the system, as you said, to be more accessible and more affordable to people.
You might just, as a closing action item, you might just challenge whoever is exposed to this, develop a use case and tell me how generative AI might improve it. Start there. Collect the first few hundred of them and see what happens.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I'm still waiting for my my Star Trek tricorder that people always talk about, right? And I know there have been some attempts to make tricorders. I don't know, I haven't looked into how those have come out or anything, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity. So I think that is a great closing action item for people.
Excellent. Well, thank you for getting a hold of me, and thank you for offering me this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, thank you for coming to chat with me. I appreciate it. I'm going to end our